Okay, so good morning.
Guten Morgen.
And so I thought we could
Ich
start
dachte, wir könnten
meditation.
mit einer kurzen Meditation beginnen. Also,
So one can so initially focus the mind internally.
richtet den Geist zunächst nach innen aus, sammelt euch.
On the inside.
Richtet den Geist nach innen. Und zwar zu 100%. Voll und ganz.
So also to make a decision in the mind to be well concentrated.
Und entscheidet für euch, dass ihr euch gut konzentrieren wollt.
Worry about the comings and goings around oneself.
Euch nicht auf das konzentrieren wollt, was um euch herum vor sich geht. Und achtet darauf, dass der Atem natürlich vonstatten geht, dass ihr natürlich ein- und ausatmet.
And then, so since the mind, it's good for the mind to have an object.
Und da es gut für den Geist ist, ein Objekt zu haben,
visualize that with the in-breath, the breathing is filling, the breath is filling our body.
Der Atem unseren Körper anfüllt, wie Wasser eine Vase ausfüllt.
And then with the exhaling, it disperses into wide space.
Dann mit dem Ausatmen wird er in den offenen Raum ausgestoßen.
Wide space like the sky
Also man kann
from a mountaintop.
Weiten Raum wie von einem Berggipfel vorstellen.
And so then in a relaxed but complete way, combining the mind with the meditation.
Sollte der Geist mit der Meditation verbunden werden, in einer entspannten Weise.
So we can do this for a few minutes.
Das sollten wir jetzt einige Minuten tun.
And so then as the mind becomes more calm,
und wenn der Geist nun ruhiger wird, kann man versuchen, die klare und erkennende Natur des Bewusstseins zu erkennen.
So even if the mind isn't clear in its totality, but one can see some clarity around the edges. Like maybe at the edges of the thoughts or the edges of the emotions. And perhaps one can see to some degree how the mind is free from self. So how the self, that is the focal point through 24 hours a day, is not findable inside the mind. So perhaps one can see this to some degree. So the self, it will also always appear to the mind as permanent and also partless. But then the mind is impermanent, and it has also many parts, so which we can see are changing all the time. So maybe by reflecting on this, we can also see how the notion of the self-existing self is unrealistic. So how there's no self-existing self in the mind. So the self appears all the time until we actually look for it. So if one analyzes the different parts of the mind objectively, then one can see that they're empty of self. So the self exists only as merely labeled relative to what is happening in the mind, but it cannot be found in any part of the mind. So similarly, so also the mind itself is merely labeled. So there's no mind that exists, that is mind from its own side. So the mind has different parts, which are the basis for the label mind. But there's no intrinsic mind to be found in any of the parts. And also not in the earlier and later moments. So we can just reflect on this a little bit according to our ability, with a relaxed and well-composed mind. Also perhaps remembering the analogy that Rinpoche explained last night. Okay, then thank you very much. So what you don't know is it's very difficult to see you because I'm blinded by the lights. So I thought maybe we could start with with one question, if there's a question, we could have a question. If that works, do we have a microphone? You don't have to, just in case.
Thank you. I have a question. You spoke about the parts of the mind. And so are the parts of the mind the different consciousnesses? What are the parts of the mind?
Okay, so that's a very clear and brief question. Thank you. So, So the first thing, or one fundamental thing to understand about the mind is so its nature is clear and knowing. But then, so when we, most likely, so when we hear mind or we think mind, we tend to imagine something partless and unitary. That is because of the imprints of ignorance, grasping at self-existence, by the way. So the reality is that then what we call mind has many parts. So it helps perhaps, okay, so there are different ways to categorize mind, and one fundamental way that is maybe helpful is, so the mind is divided into sensory consciousnesses and mental consciousness. So that is a very important division. The sense consciousnesses are the 5 sense consciousnesses. So the visual consciousness or eye consciousness, the auditory consciousness or ear consciousness, and so forth. So there is a consciousness related to each of the 5 senses. And so it is maybe good to note that so in Buddhism, consciousness is strictly non-material. So while it is related to the physical sense powers, it should not be confused with those physical sense powers. So that leads back to the initial point that the mind is clear and knowing. So each part of the mind is clear and knowing, whether it is sense consciousness or whether it is mental consciousness. So we have these 5 sense consciousnesses. So I guess they're easy. Then there's one related further on. So there's one related to the nose for smell, one related to the taste faculty for taste, and then there's the body consciousness, which which is distributed throughout the whole body. So the physical, the body sense power is distributed throughout the body. So as human beings, especially without training, while there is mental consciousness, and in reality, the mental consciousness is disproportionately, immensely vaster than the sense consciousness. And it is also, the mental consciousness is also infinitely more important. It is the mental consciousness, for example, that determines whether one is happy on a day-to-day basis. But so as human beings, initially, so our attention is very much focused to the external world and sensory objects. So we tend to neglect mental consciousness. And perhaps mental consciousness is also difficult. It is, of course, also difficult to identify. But then in the mental consciousness, we have anyway, so there's a lot going on in the mental, many different thoughts, conceptual consciousnesses, feelings and emotions. So all the mental afflictions that were identified by the Buddha as the root cause of suffering, such as attachment, anger, and ignorance, and they are found in the mental consciousness. Also the self-cherishing, which is also found. It is not, strictly speaking, it is not included in the afflictions, but it is also found in the mental consciousness. So we can say, so part of the mental consciousness, it belongs to what is referred to as the afflicted side. So actually in the text it says totally afflicted, but that's maybe too strong to contemplate at the beginning, so one can just think afflicted. And then there are other parts of the mental consciousness that will belong to the positive side, the white side. These are, for example, love and compassion. So love is a separate state of mind. Compassion is a separate state of mind. Patience, generosity, ethics, then also wisdom, concentration. So these are all found in the mental consciousness. And these belong then to the positive side. And they're all parts, so these are all parts of the mind. And actually, so that's the all parts of the mind. Okay. So initially, when we hear mind, and we visualize mind, we probably most likely visualize a unitary, partless object. But then when we learn more about the mind, then we realize there are all these parts. And this unical mind that we initially visualized, that does not really exist. So our feeling will be that the mind exists from its own side. So when I think, so what perhaps happens very frequently is that we look in our mind what is going on there for the purpose of self-identification. And then, for example, if there is anger, and then the mind thinks, oh, now I'm angry. And then at that time, immediately we think that the I that is angry, so we think we are somebody from our own side who is angry. And especially a person who is angry a lot, then they tend to think, so anger is like an intrinsic, it's my nature. Some people will think anger is my nature. It's my nature to be angry. And so then that thought blocks change. So when we think it is my nature to be angry, then in that moment, no one has given up the thought of liberation and enlightenment. So no one may still do practices and to go to classes, Buddhist classes, but if we deep down in our mind, we think, no, I'm angry, so from inside the mind, like my nature is to be angry, then deep down in our mind, we don't believe that we can actually change. So that is a very fundamental problem. And so in Buddhism, so the highest explanation of Buddha nature relates to the emptiness of the mind. So that the mind itself is not self-existent, and also no part of the mind is self-existent. So as Shantideva said, actually one can transform the mind into anything that one wants to. is there another question? We could have another. Yes?
Hallo.
Hi.
Und zwar, alles im Leben hat ja zwei Seiten, als Beispiel gut und böse.
I don't understand anything. Sorry. Maybe a little bit slower.
I will try. I try. Everything in life has two sides, good and wrong. And how can I find this in the Erleuchtung? In the Erleuchtung, kann mir das jemand? Enlightenment, yes. How can I find both sides in the enlightenment?
Okay. Yeah, it is okay to, if it's easier, one can also ask the question in German and then I can just translate it. So I think the question was, so we have the good parts of the mind and mistaken parts or wrong parts of the mind, and how can we find these in the state of enlightenment? Is that correct? Yeah, that is a very good question. So there are no wrong paths in enlightened consciousness. So the enlightened consciousness, to become enlightened, or let's roll it. Let's go from the other side. So why is the present mind not enlightened? So we have Buddha nature, but we are not enlightened. So what is the reason for that? So the reason for that is there's not really any, it's not very hidden. It's very practical. The reason why we are not enlightened is because we have anger, we have attachment, we have ignorance, and also particularly we have self-cherishing. So that's the reason. If we compare the enlightened mind with our present mind, so then there will be no difference in nature. So the enlightened mind is clear in knowing, the nature of the enlightened mind is clear in knowing, and the nature of our mind is clear in knowing. So we have to ask, what is the difference? So the difference is that our mind at the present time has good parts and bad parts, and the enlightened mind has no bad parts. It has only good parts. But it is not, so we shouldn't think, so it's like taking out the bad parts of our present mind, and then then one will be enlightened just with the good parts that we have at the present moment. That is not like that. So it leads to a very fundamental question, how do we change the mind? How do we get rid of the disturbing parts of the mind? Yeah, so my feeling is that that information has not arrived in the Western culture very well yet. Because we hear in Buddhism, so we hear about the root causes of suffering, and we hear that we have to somehow purify our mind of them. But so how that is exactly done, that is a little bit hazy. And then also maybe we get this idea, so we just have to take something out of our mind, and then the mind will be magically enlightened. So what we have to do is we have to transform the present day afflicted mind into the pure and omniscient mind of a Buddha by developing the antidotes to the disturbing parts. So we have already established, let's assume, so we have already established before that the mind can change. So how do we get rid of disturbing parts of the mind? For example, anger. And again, anger itself, it is just, has actually many parts. There's the very strong anger that arises momentarily, for example. There's maybe perhaps more poisonous is the latent, the sort of residual anger that is resentment. So perhaps it is even a situation where when we look in our mind and we get also used to become more mindful of our mind and analyze our mind throughout the day, we realize that actually we could not really point to one single moment in our life where we can sit down, where our mind is really free, totally free from anger. No anger at people that have harmed us in the past. No anger at things that happen at the present. Not being angry at things that happen in the future. So there are a lot of so His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he once gave a talk on the nature of mind, and there he said, at every given moment there are thousands of conceptual thoughts belonging to the family of attachment in the mind. So it is, for many people, it is also like this with anger. So how to change that? How to get rid of that? Because obviously, so the positive parts of our mind, which also everybody has. So everybody has a certain amount of love and compassion, patience, and so forth, but they are not enough to counteract the present anger. So what we need to do is we need to develop new qualities that we don't have at the present time. The anger is not just going to go away by itself. There's this Buddhist, there's this misunderstanding practice where one thinks all one has to do is to watch one's anger and it will go away by itself. But So the anger that one has had in one's mind, maybe since 10 years, 20 years, or longer, it has had plenty of time to go away, so why didn't it do that? And also, I think anybody that actually tries to change their mind, to be a better person throughout the day and to be less angry, especially in difficult situations, they will say, oh, there's no way that this is just going away by itself. So we need, So the Buddha taught the way of the antidote. The antidote. It is basically like light and darkness. So, if you look at the nature of anger, the fundamental nature of anger wants to harm the object or destroy the object. So in relation to another person, which is one of the main instances of anger, so we want to harm the other person. The opposite of wanting to harm the other person is wanting the other person to be happy, or wanting the other person to be free from suffering. So these two, so the mental state wishing the other person to be happy, that would be love. The mental state wishing the other person to be free from suffering, that is compassion. And those two cancel out anger. So one primary method to reduce our anger is to develop our love and compassion. Specifically, in relation to the objects that we have most of the anger to. Sometimes it is very easy to have the general altruistic love and compassion for all sentient beings, which one visualizes, but then it becomes very difficult to have actual love and compassion for the people in one's day-to-day life. So anyhow, so the Buddhist way is the way of the antidote, the development of the mind, developing new qualities that we don't have at the present time. And as it is with light and darkness, when we switch on the light, the darkness, it will go away simultaneously. So it is not our experience that we switch on the light and then have to look for another additional method to get rid of the darkness in the room. So we switch on the light and simultaneously the darkness disappears. So that's what will happen with the antidote. So if we generate very powerful antidotes in the mind, then simultaneously the opposing affliction, it will automatically become less or totally disappear. So that is a very different approach from constantly watching the anger and constantly being mentally immersed in one's anger. So there is this term generating the graduated path to enlightenment in the mind. So it refers to primarily to generating new qualities that we have not at the present time, which then by their very nature will counteract the different mental afflictions. So, and the interesting thing is, when we meditate on the different topics that are explained in the Buddha's teachings, or in the graduated path to enlightenment teachings, it is not like one is doing these meditations and then needs some additional method to counteract the afflictions. So that meditation itself becomes the antidote. So for example, when we let's say we are angry at somebody, but then we cultivate love and compassion for that person. Nobody is saying that will be easy. But so if we cultivate love and compassion for that person, so in the moment where we generate new love and compassion for that person, so the initial anger, it will be gone. So sometimes, if the mind is not trained yet so well, so then the mind becomes a little bit confused. It sort of remembers, oh, I was angry. And then in one's mind, one goes back to the initial anger, and then the anger comes back. So that is a mistake. So we need to combine these positive mental states with strong mindfulness and concentration. So that is the purpose of mindfulness, and when we say that we should act with mindfulness throughout the day. Establishing these positive mental states, such as love and compassion, also renunciation, the wisdom realizing emptiness, bodhicitta, with strong mindfulness as permanent parts of our mind. Initially, perhaps the feeling will be, I'm going to lose something if I reduce the negative parts of my mind. So maybe one has gotten used to the idea of thinking of oneself in terms of having good parts, good sides, and having bad sides. That's just the mind that has not analyzed oneself with wisdom. Also on a day-to-day basis, so we want to be happy or happier. So, and mental unhappiness, it comes from the mental afflictions and self-cherishing. So we need to, and this is something to be analyzed by oneself. So we need to understand this through our own experience. So the Buddhist path is not a path of blind faith. Initially, there may be some discomfort, reducing the negative side, because we feel, oh, it's a part of myself, it's sort of naturally there. But then when we actually apply the Buddha's teachings to our mind and our life, and we realize through our own experience, so if that negative side, the anger, the attachment, if that gets stronger, I'm more unhappy. If the self-cherishing gets stronger, I'm more unhappy. So that is one's own incontrovertible experience. And then at that time, already then the thought is maybe generated, or if I could reduce my self-cherishing, if I could reduce my anger, I would feel much better. And then the mind looks for a method. But the method is not so much in focusing on the anger or focusing on the self-cherishing and then sort of reducing them through willpower. So that won't work. So that will only make oneself tired and frustrated. So if we have this idea, we somehow need to focus on the anger and then remove it from our mind. That is not how it works. Also, for example, self-cherishing can only be overcome by developing the mind that cherishes others. So by altruism, by the mind that focuses on others and takes others as the object of one's love and compassion. So if we widen out our mind, in our meditation and also throughout the day, generating awareness that there are also other human beings in the universe besides ourselves, and they all have feelings, they all experience unwanted suffering. So then that already takes the mind away from the self-cherishing. But then the moment we lose that awareness, then the mind it sort of retreats again onto itself, and the self-cherishing is back. So the Buddhist method is really the method of the antidote, generating the opposing good qualities. So our main focus should be on that, in my opinion, and a little experience anyway. Anyway, it's explained like that in the text, so that's for sure. Of course, part of the spiritual process is to also understand anger, to understand self-cherishing, but there's not that much to understand. So we don't need to go back every day to the anger over and over and over and over again and analyze it again and again. There's nothing new to discover. What we want actually is something different. So the main focus should be on generating the path in the mind. So protecting the identifying, protecting and developing the qualities that we already have. And probably more important, developing new qualities that we have not yet, that we do not have yet. So if we meditate properly on love and compassion for the other person, or let's say if we cultivate properly love and compassion for the other person, the anger will go away by itself. So then there's also no need to fight with the anger. So instead of fighting with the anger, the more effort should be put into generating more love and compassion for the other person. But then, of course, sometimes one doesn't want to do that. So that's due to the self-cherishing and ignorance. Then there are other obstacles to overcome in that case. Anyhow. Like another example for the system of the antidote is, if we meditate on impermanence, it will counteract the grasping at permanence in our mind. So the better our understanding of impermanence, automatically the less afflictions are in the mind. So instead of the mind sort of constantly watching, observing, analyzing the afflictions, and being in this way constantly immersed in the afflictions, it's better to take the mind to those different meditations that are explained in the Buddhist path. And so by meditating on impermanence and cultivating impermanence, that is very interesting. So by cultivating impermanence, the affliction, it cannot stay simultaneously in the mind with an understanding of impermanence. That is the beauty of the Buddhist path. So it is not like we have to meditate, make an effort to understand impermanence and meditate on impermanence, and then we still have to do something extra to counteract the afflictions. So as long as we have this experience that our mind is overwhelmed by afflictions or controlled by afflictions, that means we have not yet generated very strong antidotes. But if we go through the day, for example, with a very strong, clear understanding of impermanence, it leaves little room for attachment. And so the attachment will clear automatically. A person who is aware, if we are aware of our own impermanence, what's the word? So that when we will have to die sometime, and but we don't know when. Automatically, it reduces attachment for material objects. It automatically reduces the mind that is attracted to superficialities and the mundane world. If we, in the moment where we lose our awareness of impermanence, then immediately, because our mind is not yet trained so well, so immediately the afflictions are back. So maybe to lead it back to the question, so it is by developing the mind in what we call the graduated path to enlightenment, so a step-by-step development of the mind. So we have first to develop fundamental qualities, then we can develop higher qualities, and the mind, so the mind gets developed further and further, and through that, so the mind gets developed further and further. So this development, it has also different parts, but if we list the three main ones, is wisdom, concentration, and mindfulness. So each quality will be combined with wisdom, and then to make it stable, we combine it with concentration. And the concentration comes from mindfulness. So we combine the qualities with mindfulness, keeping them in our mind, so like making them permanent parts in our mind. So over time they increase, also through our accumulation of merit and wisdom. And the end of that is then the attainment of enlightenment, when the most powerful antidotes have generated, then even the most subtle of the obscurations that Lama Zopa Rinpoche mentioned yesterday will be purified from the mind. So the purification of the mind is also something that happens in a gradual, step-by-step manner. And so in the enlightened state, so then there is no more, there are no more afflictions, and nothing that belongs to the afflicted side. But it is very good to initially analyze well within one's mind what is actually afflicted and what is not. And while maybe at the beginning there may be some sense of loss, oh, so if I'm reducing my afflictions, maybe I will experience a sense of loss. That feeling that can be there, it's quite likely. It's a sign of having some progress that this feeling comes. But then when we get more experience and we also, through our experience, we see the difference. So we see the difference in quality between the positive mind and the afflicted mind, and the difference is so huge that then there will be no sense of loss anymore. Yes, please.
Rinpoche had said yesterday there were ghosts, they hang on our mind and make Schaden. Ach so, gut. Also, dass sich Geistwesen an uns dranheften in bestimmten Situationen und unseren Geist negativ verändern und dann Schaden verursachen. Meine Frage dazu ist, wenn es richtig ist, dass alle 6 Daseinsbereiche in unserem Geist vorhanden sind, weil wir ja unendlich viele Existenzen gehabt haben und die in allen Bereichen, dann wäre es ja so, dass das Wesen aus unserem eigenen Geist sind, die sich anheften. Und dann ist es auch so, wenn ich jetzt Liebe und Mitgefühl habe für die Wesen, dann habe ich Mitgefühl mit meinem eigenen Geist. Das heißt, dann ist das der Weg zur Erleuchtung, dass ich alle 6 Daseinsbereiche in mir läutere und damit die Erleuchtung erreiche, und zwar allein über das Mitgefühl und die Erkenntnis, dass das ich bin. Also dass das Wesen, das mir schadet, ich selbst bin und alles in meinem Geist entstanden ist.
Okay. So I think I have to summarize. So anyway, one part of the question, the start of the question, was in relation to what Lama Zopa Rinpoche mentioned last night about spirits, and so the mind being influenced by spirits in a negative way. And So then, so she saying, so she says that so that no, so since everything comes from the mind, so everything is contained in the mind. So then, therefore, also this spirit is contained in the mind, and it sort of needs to be purified within oneself. Yeah, so that is probably not quite accurate. In Buddhism, we have the 4 schools of thought. The highest one being the Prasangika Madhyamika, which do assert the existence of outer objects. So, not just because the other person is merely labeled, or just because the other sentient being is merely labeled, that does not mean that they are part of our mind. That would lead to many absurd consequences. So there is this concept. So one says, in order to understand the Prasangika Madhyamaka point of view, one needs to be free from the 2 extremes. So one needs to, on the one hand, understand how things are merely labeled by the mind, and then how that is not contradicted by there being external objects. So that is not so easy. So it is understandable that one would think, so it follows because the object is merely labeled, therefore it is contained in one's mind, in my mind, but that is not accurate. For example, every sentient being has their own mental continuum and their own karma. It says very clearly when it explains the 4 fundamental points of karma that we cannot experience the karmic result of an action created by another person. So that spirit, it is a sentient being with its own mind stream, and it is experiencing its own the results of its own harmful karma. No, us labeling it the spirit, it doesn't mean that we create the spirit. So, just because we label, it doesn't mean that we become God. Then everybody would be God. Yeah, so the spirit, it's just like another person in a sense. It's not a human because it doesn't have a human body and mind. So the basis is different. It experiences more suffering, but it has its own continuity of mind, and it is experiencing the results of the karma that it generated in past lives, and it creates constantly new karma that then the future being or person will experience. So the spirit is a part of all sentient beings. And since we are training our mind in love and compassion for all sentient beings, then also the spirit becomes an object of our love and compassion, which is one of the main antidotes against the spirit harm, is to generate love and compassion for the spirit. So one afternoon in Darmstadt, I translated for one of my teachers, Demology Rinpoche, for 3 interviews. Normally Rinpoche had another translator, but that one was not available. And so it was very interesting. There were 3 interviews, 3 people came, and all the 3 interviews were related to spirit harms. And they were all non-Buddhist from different countries. And so Demology Rinpoche always gave the similar advice. So one part of the advice was always to generate love and compassion for the spirit, for the harmer. And then the other part of the advice was to take very strong refuge. So in Buddhism, then we take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. It is explained as one of the benefits of taking refuge, that one is protected from spirit harm. These 3 people, they were all Christian background, so Demology Rinpoche just advised them to take refuge, strong refuge in their own refuge. So whether it's Jesus or God. So these 2 parts were so the main methods: love and compassion and refuge, to overcome the spirit harm. So the 6 realms of existence, which she referred to those, so they don't exist in our mind. So there's so the viewpoint of phenomena being merely labeled needs to be combined with the viewpoint that there are external objects. That is very hard to do. That's a very, very hard. So I think one part of the advice that Lama Zopa Rinpoche gave last night is, we should not trust the thoughts that arise in our mind. I think that is very important, whether one has a spirit harm or not. Which one can anyway, one doesn't know. It's very hard for us to know. I mean, most of the time, when we experience disturbances, it is actually our mind. There are people with spirit harms, but it's not like the majority. So, but in both cases, it is very dangerous to just look into the mind, look what is there without discrimination, and then identify with what is there. I think that is a very common process. I don't know, maybe it happens, it seems to happen very frequently, maybe all the time during the day, maybe it's only me, maybe not for you, I don't know. So you can check, how does the mind constantly undergo a process of self-identification? Always checking back in the mind, how am I? For example, how do I feel with regards to this object or this person? And then, if we dislike the object and we generate anger, and then we think, I don't like that person. So we sort of have the feeling like we have discovered our nature of not liking that person. That is totally opposite the view of emptiness. So the Buddhist approach is different. So in the Buddhist approach, we look at our mind with the wisdom that can distinguish positive mental states from harmful mental states. So for example, as a Buddhist practitioner, when we realize I have generated anger towards that person, then instead of thinking, oh, now that's me, I'm somebody who dislikes that person, the Buddhist practitioner would think, oh no, I've generated anger for this sentient being. So that is very harmful. I've made vows to practice love and compassion to all sentient beings. So I need to reduce this anger and meditate, cultivate love and compassion for that person. So that is very different. That is a very different approach. So the mind, under the control of ignorance, it always thinks that it is self-existing. And then if we always look in our mind, identifying with what sort of naturally arises there, that is very dangerous because afflictions arise very easily in the mind. But then also the afflictions change. So we analyze our mind. So how do I feel towards that person? Then maybe aversion is generated because we don't like the nose of that person. And so then we think, now I dislike this person. So we have the feeling, I'm somebody who dislikes that person. That person, from their nature, is not for me. So that is not the Buddhist approach. And it's good not to get into this habit, going through life, constantly sort of scanning, how do I feel in relation to different objects. So of course, in Buddhism, we also one analyzes the mind with introspection. So that's different. It's just to see, in case anger has arisen, or we notice anger has arisen, then the anger is identified as something to be overcome. We don't think, oh, now that's me. And now I have, that person is somebody that I from their side, they're intrinsically dislikable. And it's now in my nature to be somebody that dislikes that person. That is sort of opposite of the wisdom side. Yes, so whether we have a spirit harm or not, so not to trust one's impulses and thoughts is very, very wise. It's also Lama Ösel Rinpoche said last year when he gave his talk. He said, so don't trust your thoughts. So we need to analyze what is happening in our mind with wisdom. We can't just trust everything that arises in our mind. So we could have time for one more question, if you like. Yes.
Gab es früher mal den Zustand, wo es nur Erleuchtung gab, also wo der Geist von diesen ganzen Anhaftungen und Ärger und so weiter nicht beeinflusst war? Oder wie kam es dazu eigentlich, dass, also wo ist die ursprüngliche Ursache von der Degenerierung des Geistes?
Yeah, so the question is relating to the original cause of the mind, and so whether there was ever a state of enlightenment that one lost. Yeah, so in Buddhism, there is no first cause. It is also, I think it is also a manifestation of the grasping at self-existence that the mind thinks there needs to have been a first cause, some ultimate cause. But in Buddhism, the answer is simple but difficult, subtle, so that there was never a first cause. That the mind existed since beginningless times. Actually, if we think about cause and effect, then we come to realize that a first cause is actually, it's an oxymoron. It's not possible. And so maybe relating it back to a point that Rinpoche was making last night, at least 2 times, when he was talking about peace. And so he said there are different types of peace. There's a general peace. So he was giving one example, world peace. There could be also, the peace of like having a peaceful life or having a peaceful day. And then there's the peace of liberation and enlightenment, which now it's a little bit has become a little bit of a haze. But I think anyway, Wednesday or Thursday, so Rinpoche, he emphasized on that point. He said, there's the peace of liberation and enlightenment. There's it's so much greater, even than world peace, because it doesn't go away. So that is one reason. So when we have attained the truth of cessation, if you have attained full enlightenment, that is irreversible. So the afflictions, they will not come back. It is not just some peace that one temporarily attains with the mind still being fundamentally afflicted, like sleeping maybe. There's one misconception with regards to the truth of cessation, where we think the truth of cessation is something that is attained temporarily, but then will go away again. Like some people think, well, I can be maybe peaceful temporarily, but fundamentally I will be afflicted. So but actual truth of cessation is totally, it's not only free from the afflictions. How to explain this? Maybe to relate it to what we discussed earlier, it's not just about the mind being free from the afflictions. It's not just about that. No, if we think in this way, the mind is free from the afflictions, it's a reductionist concept. We think then probably there will be less than there is now. But so as we discussed earlier, actually how we get rid of the afflictions is by developing the different qualities. So in the enlightened state, the different qualities, they have been developed very strongly. And now maybe one point, that is a very crucial point, is so that the afflictions in general, they are non-realistic mental states. They are not realistic. Now, in German we say realitätsfremd. So it's from the, not realistic, just a German word. And so as one of my other teachers, Dagi Rinpoche, always likes to point out, the path, for example, love and compassion, what do they have on their side is reality. They're rooted in reality. So the Buddhist path, developing the Buddhist path, it's not just it is not just substituting one mental state for another mental state, but the mental states that one is generating, such as love and compassion, so they are actually rooted in reality. So that's what they have on their side. So that's why I said earlier, all those positive mental states, they're always combined with wisdom, understanding some aspect of reality. Anger, attachment, it seems like they're rooted in a reality, but in actuality they are not. And that's very hard to comprehend. That if we are angry at a person, so actually in that moment, so how the person appears to our mind, that's only our projection. So as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he frequently mentions this study that was done in the United States by one professor relating anger and the distortions of the mind that accompany anger. And so this professor, without Buddhist background, came to the conclusion that 90% of what we perceive when we are angry on the object or in the object, that is not existent. So in Buddhism we would say 100%, but anyway, 90%. I always think 90%, that's quite good. The same for attachment. So attachment is not rooted in reality. It's based on unrealistic projections on the object. Anger is not rooted in reality. It is based on unrealistic negative projections on the object. And so then, fundamentally, anger and attachment and the other afflictions, they all come from ignorance. They're grasping at inherent existence. So this is also a total hallucination. So One thing that happens on the path to enlightenment is, or how one becomes enlightened is, so one aspect of the path to enlightenment is to investigate reality. How does the object really exist? And so by investigating objectively, one realizes that the intrinsic self, this self-existing self, this appearance of the self-existing self that is constantly accompanying us, so that is totally unrealistic. So the important part here, it's not just substituting one philosophical concept for another one, or substituting one uncomfortable mental state with a comfortable mental state. It's not like that. It's about actually analyzing and seeing. And because wisdom is rooted in reality, and maybe just as a side to the previous question, one fundamental principle in Buddhism are the two truths. So we have conventional reality and ultimate reality. So there is conventional reality, something that does exist. So it's the nature. If we compare wisdom and ignorance, the wisdom is always stronger. Why? Because it is rooted in reality. For example, if we have had some misconception about another person, we thought that person has done something, and we generated anger at that person. Then later we meet that person and we voice our concerns to the person, and it gets clarified. So then in the moment where we discover, where our mind discovers the person hasn't done that action, the misconception, it goes simultaneously. It disappears simultaneously from the mind. So I think that is a very good day-to-day example where we can always see the wisdom that understands reality is always stronger than the ignorance that is confused with regards to reality. It always is like that. So therefore, now to overcome ignorance, we need to not just understand conventional reality, but ultimate reality. That is a very powerful. That's like a totally different world. That's very powerful. And again, that's really good to contemplate. It's not just like temporarily feeling a little bit better, and then the negative states come back. It is about actually cognizing that the apprehended object of ignorance is non-existent. So by continuously meditating on this wisdom, realizing ultimate reality, combining it with mindfulness and concentration, so the wisdom, the ignorance, it becomes less and less in the mind automatically until it totally disappears. And after that, one doesn't go back. Because after this cognition of reality, the ignorance doesn't come back at some time later. So that's one reason why the state of enlightenment is irreversible. Which means, there was not a time when we were enlightened before. But as Lama Zopa Rinpoche likes to say, once we attain enlightenment or liberation, it becomes irreversible. So the effort, it's worth the effort. With other things, one doesn't quite know. One puts in a lot of effort, one doesn't know, will it be successful? Even if it is successful, how long will it last? But with the path to enlightenment, if we have generated the path to enlightenment in our mind fully, there's no, then no, it's irreversible. Yeah. Zwang. Okay. Then. So then I thought, towards the end, we could meditate on 10 minutes, maybe already as a preparation for tonight, on a virtuous, altruistic motivation. So we can again collect the mind internally, peacefully. And so if one can, or as much as one can, then maybe initially contemplating the sufferings of cyclic existence in relation to oneself. So the sufferings of the lower realms, the day-to-day sufferings, or relating it to the three sufferings: suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and pervasive compounding suffering. So whatever one knows from previous Buddhist teachings and reading. And then one can widen out one's mind, and creating this awareness that the other people in one's life, and also other people in the world in general, are also experiencing the same or similar sufferings. So how every person and every sentient being is experiencing suffering against their will, suffering they don't wish for. So then maybe we can try to generate the thought. So I definitely have to look after the happiness of all sentient beings. There are many, and I'm only one, and they're suffering. And so for that reason, then I'm going to take the Medicine Buddha initiation. So I'm not going to take it for the purpose of self, but for the purpose of others, so that I can become enlightened quicker and help others better. Okay, then thank you very much. And so I want to also thank you very much, so that I had the opportunity, the chance to spend this morning talking about the Dharma. So that came only about because you came. Otherwise I would be left talking to myself. And even I contradict myself the most sometimes.